persistent, not increase, decrease, persistent decrease in general price level is deflation. We know this because deflation is opposite of inflation, right? Yes or no, right? And then he says that there are two types of deflation. One is good, one is bad. Which one is good? When aggregate supply is increasing, and that is the reason for your prices to fall. That is good because that means your production potential is increasing. So kind of makes sense. And the bad one is when your aggregate demand is falling. So that is bad one, right? Kind of negative. Bad is perhaps not a very appropriate word. Here's one you could have used. One is beneficial or advantageous is a better word. One, deflation is advantageous for an economy, which is basically when aggregate supply shifts to the right, because that means your production potential has increased and now your prices are low, right? But I'm reading your question. Okay. Then he has made graphs. Okay. Zohan, I mean, the graphs are correct, but you know, the graphs are too, I would say, not neat at all, right? So you should be working on that, right? A little neat graphs that, you know, kind of, it's not that you'll get extra credit for it, but I mean, examiner could read it clearly and everything, you know, looks good on that, right? So make sure you do that. The figure one shows that deflation is caused by a shift leftwards of demand curve, right? So he has shown that the demand curve has shifted leftwards, and that's why the that has decreased, right? General price level has decreased. Okay, later on he writes, later on Zohan has written, the price level from P1 to P2, this has happened because of a fall in the consumer's income, rise in unemployment rate causing the purchasing power to drop, leading to consumers buy less goods and services. This can also happen by the less consumer confidence due to inflation. The consumer will hold their spending, waiting the prices to fall. Conversely, deflation can also happen by rightward shift in aggregate supply, as shown in the figure. Rightward shift leads to deflation from this to this, right? That's correct. That's correct. A good inflation can rise. As good inflation can, there is more goods and services available by which consumers can benefit. Is this the same questions one? I'm assuming you're sending me the questions in order, right? Economy opportunity will increase, leading the purchasing power and living standards to rise. It will also cause, right? Okay. A good, and now you have changed the word from deflation to inflation. A good inflation, there is more goods and services available by which consumers can benefit from lower prices that will be beneficial. So that was a typo. I get it. Was it a typo? Right. Yeah. Got it. More purchasing power as the economy, employment opportunity increase, lending the purchasing power, living standards rise, but it might also, right. It might have current account surplus as per the lower prices. Got it. Good explanations, Juan. Good explanation. Let's discuss this question together, right? So students, this is this question that we are doing over here, right? This is this question that we are doing over here. Just give me a second and we'll get started. Okay. Now, the question said, explain. Yeah. Zuhan, you want to say something? How many marks out of it? Oh, okay. So Zuhan, I would say the definition is correct. The explanation is correct. Analysis could have been a little better. I would say 6. Analysis could have been better. Everything else, knowledge is absolutely fine. Graphs are correct. But analysis could have been better. How? I'll tell you. You did mention the correct points, but you did not elaborate on that, right? Now, let me tell you exactly how to elaborate. That will give you a good idea to how to write an answer. Okay, now students, think about this. Now just listen to me very carefully, Zohan. The question said, explain what is deflation and explain using aggregate demand and aggregate supply, how deflation occurs in an economy. Easy, right? What is deflation? And explain using aggregate demand and aggregate supply how deflation occurs in the economy. Now we do know that deflation is opposite of inflation, and that is decrease in, what is that? That is decrease in your general price level. So if prices rise, that is inflation. If prices decrease, that is deflation, right? Now what we have on the y-axis, we have GPL, general price level. What do we have on the x-axis? We have real GDP. Easy. Okay. Now, first thing that you need to know, that where the aggregate demand, aggregate supply intersect, that's macroeconomic equilibrium in an economy, right? So Zohan used this shape, sorry, my bad. This shape he used for aggregate demand and aggregate supply. So either you use this shape, which is a curve, or you use a straight line that will not make any difference. Are you getting me, right? So students, if you are confused that what should be the shape, right? So when we say demand curve, we say it curve, but we draw it as a line, right? So whether you draw a demand curve like this, or sorry about that, either you draw a demand curve like this or you draw a straight line, it doesn't make any difference, right? You will get full credit for both, right? Okay, now where aggregate demand, aggregate supply intersect, that is macroeconomic equilibrium in the economy. That shows you two things: what is the current price level, what is the current general price level in the economy, and what is the real GDP at the moment. Easy, good, okay. Now deflation, as Zohan correctly pointed out, can happen due to two reasons, right? So one is increase in your aggregate supply. Did all of you get to understand the question, students? So one type of deflation happens due to rise in your aggregate supply. And then now here's the thing, Zohan, here you should have explained a little more, right? Here you should have explained a little more that what causes an increase in aggregate supply, right? What causes an increase in aggregate supply, right? Mubin, this is the question. Where with the handwriting? Explain what is meant by deflation. I'm reading it for you. Explain what is meant by deflation and use aggregate demand and aggregate supply to explain how it might arise. How it might arise in an economy. What is deflation? And using aggregate demand, aggregate supply, explain how it might arise in an economy. Got it? Easy? Okay, now what you should have done here in your question, which lacks a little bit, you have to explain what will cause a rightward shift in aggregate supply. So rightward shift in aggregate supply happens due to what? Due to improvement in factor endowment. Now, what is improvement in factor endowment? So improvement in factor endowment happens when you have more quantity or quality of resources becoming available. Can you all give me a second? Just give me a second. There is a bell at my door. I'll quickly go and check, right? Just a second. Okay, now can you hear me, students? So what causes the rightward shift in aggregate supply? Improvement in factor endowment. And what actually factor endowment is, right? So when the quantity or the quality of resources improve, that's what improvement in factor endowment is. So there could be two reasons. Either there is increase in quantity of resources, right? And then you can give some examples, right? Now think about this. One reason simply could be more labor force. How would your labor force would increase? Because of more population, right? So if population of a country is increasing, that means more people available for work and more labor force and more people producing goods and services. Increase in quantity of resources and improvement in quality of resources. So what ensures quality? Right? So quality is associated with things like technology, right? Technology, if technology is becoming available, more advanced machines, more training of labor and capital, right? Improvement in quality of resources. Easy? Any confusion so far, students? Anything that's not clear? Quality of resources, right? So these are the things that you need to explain in this question, right? Okay, now moving forward, right? Then you would say that another reason for deflation could be decrease in aggregate demand, right? So your aggregate demand, if your aggregate demand is decreasing, that would mean a leftward shift in aggregate demand. And now you can see for yourself, if I remove this thing here, right? Now what would that do? Now you can see that the new previous equilibrium was here, where the original aggregate supply and aggregate demand, original aggregate supply and aggregate demand were intersecting. So this was your original equilibrium. Now the new equilibrium would be where your aggregate supply intersects with your new aggregate demand. Now what is happening at this point? Have a look at this. Your real GDP is lower. Your real GDP has decreased. Less value of goods and services are being produced, but and also your general price level has decreased from GPL1 to GPL2. Okay. Now the question here again is, you need to explain why might the aggregate demand shift leftwards? And a simple explanation would be to analyze the components of aggregate demand. What are the 5 components of aggregate demand? Consumption, investment, government spending, exports minus imports, right? Now, think about this, students. If any of these components decreases, except for imports, obviously, because it's coming with a negative sign, if any of these components decrease for any of the reasons, due to any reasons, any factors, that would mean a decrease in your aggregate demand. Yes or no? right? So let me give you some examples. So Zohan, you did explain some, but you should have explained a little more in detail that consumer spending might be decreasing. Now think about this. Do you know that there was a recession during COVID and all countries faced this recession? So recession happens later. First, understand what happens when there is some abnormal situation taking on. Okay, so there's a war going on between Russia and Ukraine. And what are those two economies experiencing? Both economies are experiencing decrease in aggregate demand. Do you agree with me? I think about this. In Ukraine, I mean, the idea is fairly simple. I mean, they are being, the sad thing is they are being hit and bombed by another country. So their nationals, a lot of them have left the country already, right? And even those who are there, they would not be going shopping, living, sending kids to school, having a normal life. Are you getting me? So in such extreme circumstances, what would that do? Your consumption would decrease, right? I'm talking about a very extreme situation in this case, but there could be some other reasons as well. Let me give you another example. When COVID came, all countries imposed complete lockdown initially for the first few months, right? No one was going out. There was no economic activity, right? Except for basic food, blah, blah, blah. No restaurants, no club, no concerts, no nothing, no shopping, right? So consumption was exceptionally low, right? Aggregate demand for countries decreased, and that caused eventually recession, right? So when GDP is decreasing, that is what recession is. What is causing it? Decrease in aggregate demand. Okay. Then there could be some minor reasons. There could be some minor reasons. Investors' confidence is low, right? They don't, generally investment levels in your country are low because investors are not feeling very confident about the growth of an economy, or they're not very hopeful about the political situation might be uncertain. Sometimes what happens, elections are coming in, or something else is going on, and businesses are not feeling very optimistic about investing more and expanding their production. So this could be lower. Similarly, another reason could be government spending is less for some reasons, right? And exports could be lower, which you did explain in your answer, Zohan. Exports could be lower because of some facts like I mean, your exchange rate has appreciated a lot for some reason, right? And your exports are less competitive. Or let's say one of your major exports, in case of Pakistan, today I was having discussion with someone that this time, if the heat wave that we are recently experiencing, some of you might know, right? So that can destroy our wheat crop, and if that happens, our export of wheat could be discouraged, or sorry, decreased significantly, and things like that, right? So if any of these factors decreases, aggregate demand decreases. If aggregate demand decreases, that shifts to the left, that causes a decrease in real GDP, and that is what recession is. Decrease in real GDP is your recession. Easy? Any confusion, right? I'm just explaining you, even though the question did not ask why a recession happens, but this is what decrease in aggregate demand would do, right? So this is what you were supposed to write. What instead you did, Zohan, was that you focused less on how this happens, and instead you analyzed and explained what will happen. Why is this more bad compared to that thing? Listen to me carefully, Zohan. So I'm commenting on your answer. So what you did, instead of explaining what would cause aggregate demand to, what would cause aggregate demand to decrease, and what might cause aggregate supply to increase, which are both the reasons for causing deflation, you went on to telling the examiner that what is good, why aggregate supply, increase in aggregate supply is good, and why decrease in aggregate demand is bad, right? So before that, you should have explained in more detail that what is causing these two to happen. Is everyone following me, students? Look at this one question one more time, right? So the question said, what is meant by deflation, and use aggregate demand, aggregate supply to explain how it might arise, What happens after it? It doesn't say what effect it has on the economy, because if it would have asked what effect deflation would have in each case, then you would have explained, right? Right? Easy? Any questions, confusions, Khatija, Khizr, Abdullah, Mubin, right? We good? If we are good, then move to the next question, right? Okay, now the next question, that's all, right? Okay, great. Okay, now if you have any question, that's good. If you don't have any questions, then we can do a recent past paper. What do you suggest? Right. Just a second. Where is this one? Uh, right. Is this the Word document or the pictures one? Right. I think it's this one that we're talking about. Okay. Okay. Where does it start from? The pictures are not in order, Zohan. And secondly, don't send me, then I have to, download one by one, and then it's a mess. On phone, you can still, you can, oh, how do we download? Zohan, how about, I mean, this will take a lot of time, but trust me, I'll give you feedback on this, right? I'll give you feedback on this detailed one over the voice note today, right? And please in future, I mean, it's just due to the time, yeah, right? Just send me the picture quality is good, but just send me, right, straight up, right? So that it's easier. Even if you have to discuss in classes, that would be easier, right? But I'll definitely give you feedback on this, don't worry. Okay, now moving on, students, where will we? Okay, now let's quickly do a past paper, right? I was thinking of doing May, June 20, right? There's no preference as such. The only thing is that I'm going from recent to less recent, right? And you all are encouraged to bring your own questions to classes because that will be more helpful in a way that, I'm helping you with questions that you are having trouble with, right? We can do that May, June 2021. Yeah, we can do that. May, June 2021. Which variant to do? Okay, so if we go for 2-2, this is the marking scheme and this should be the question paper, right? So here we go. Okay, this is the marking scheme. So let's leave it for a bit. Let's download the question paper. Okay. So this is May, June 2021, right? Variant 2-2, right? 2-1. I mean, I'm accidentally open. No, sorry, 2-2, right? That's correct, right? So we will come to case study questions in a bit, right? But before that, we are doing for now for our classes nowadays, we are focusing on essay questions, right? So let's wait. Do you have a preference for one of these questions, Mubin? Or we can just start in the order and so on. Is there any particular question you want me to do? By the way, students, one more thing I would want you to request you, right? And this does take some time, right? So before the class, you are practicing on your own and you come across a difficult question, right? So what you need to do just before the class, even if 5, 10, 15 minutes before, you can just drop me a question, right? With the past paper number and the question number, right? So I just open that paper, right? It saves everyone's time. So that way would be good. Okay, question 3 we are doing here. Explain how the concept of cross elasticity of demand can be used to distinguish between goods that are substitutes and those are complements and those have no relationship, right? Perfect, great. Okay, now the question says, explain the concept of cross elasticity of demand, fine. Sorry, explain how the concept of cross elastic demand can be used to distinguish between goods that are substitutes, those that are complements, and those that have no relationship. Okay, think about this. So for this question, first thing that you need to do is to explain what exactly cross elasticity of demand is, right? Because these questions don't explicitly say to define it, but it's part of the question, right? And obviously, you can understand that without explaining the concept, you can't explain how it is applied. Are you getting me or not, right? So cross elasticity of demand, you will say, is a formula. It's a calculation that compares or that calculates. It's a formula that calculates the responsiveness of quantity demanded of one good due to change in the price of the other good. I repeat, you will say cross elasticity of demand is a calculation or a formula that calculates the responsiveness of quantity demanded of one good due to change in the price of the other good. Okay, now the way you write its formula after defining or after writing the definition, you will write its formula, which is percentage change in quantity demanded of good A divided by percentage change in quantity demanded, sorry, percentage change in price for B. So I did tell you, if you don't remember, I will repeat this, whichever variable is in the denominator. So this is the variable in the denominator. So this is independent variable. Now what it means to be an independent variable, that this variable is causing the change in this variable. This price thing is causing a change in this thing. Do you get me right or not? Why is this important? Because when you write in words, calculation would always be correct. But when you start explaining what is happening and what is causing what, then you get confused, right? So this is something that is mathematically true, and that would be true whether you study this in economics and any other subject everywhere, right? So whichever variable is in the denominator that's independent, that is causing the change. And which variable is being changed? The one that's in the numerator. So you can't say that demand is causing change in demand of A is causing change in B. No, that's incorrect. The correct is that change in price of B is causing change in demand for A. Easy, we good? We good? Can we? Right. Can we move on? Okay, quickly have a look at this question, right? So explain the concept of cross elasticity of demand. Sorry, explain how the concept of cross elastic demand can be used to distinguish between goods that are substitutes, those that are complements, and those that have no relationship, right? Simple. So first of all, you started off with defining what cross elastic demand is, then you wrote its formula like this. Then you tell that what's the relationship between substitutes. You can give some examples for questions like these. It's always good to give some examples, right? So what are substitutes? Substitutes are simply products that serve same purpose. What are substitutes? Substitutes are products that serve same purpose. Why I go to a cinema? To watch a movie. What is Netflix? An online movie streaming platform, right? I mean, there would be some differences, right? Like in cinema, there are the people watching with me, and with Netflix, I'm sitting alone watching at home, right? But the idea is that the purpose is the same. You want to watch a movie, you can go to a cinema, you can watch online, right? Similarly, Coke and Pepsi. You want to drink soft drink, right? So the taste could be slightly different, but I mean, those are quite close products, right? Similarly, going through car or going through public transport, substitute. You have to go to your destination, whether you use your own car or you use public transport, doesn't make any difference, right? Easy. Are we getting this right? So that's what substitutes are. Then define what complementary goods are. Complementary goods are products that have joint demand, or simply speaking, that are consumed together. Products that are consumed together are known as complementary goods, right? So, I mean, oftentimes people like to have sugar in their coffee or tea, right? I mean, it's just how it is, right? Similarly, some people prefer to have some brownie or some cookie with their coffee, right? That's a complementary good. What else? Some are stronger complementary goods, like this sometimes happens, right? So sometimes I like to have cookie with my coffee, sometimes I don't, right? And not everyone in the world goes like this, right? There are so many people who drink coffee without a cookie. But some things are complementary goods by the very nature that you can't use one without the other. For instance, you can't access Netflix without internet, complementary goods. You can't use a car without fuel. Yes or no, right? So these are complementary goods, which are by the very nature, you can't use one without the other. Easy. After you have defined these two terms, then you'll tell that if we assume a substitute, a pair of substitute goods, let's say Coke and Pepsi, right? If we are, or public transport and private car. Now, what happens? Recently, oil prices across the globe have skyrocketed because of this, Russia-Ukraine war and a couple of other reasons as well, right? Now, fuel is getting expensive and using a private car is more expensive, right? Some people, not all, some people would have done what? If fuel prices are going up, what would happen to the demand for public transport? Should that increase? Should that decrease? If fuel is going up, what should happen to the demand for public transport? That should increase. Simple, right? Why? Because using a private car is more expensive. So it's better to use public transport. Moving, not decrease in public transport. Yeah, public transport, not private car. Private car obviously would decrease, but right, right. So the demand for that would increase. Or let's say simply you could have said that, if private cars are becoming more expensive, what would you do? You'll use public transport, right? Easy. So now let's take another example, right? So What about if Netflix subscription is getting cheaper? Would people go more to cinemas, less to cinemas? If Netflix subscription is becoming cheaper, would people go more to cinemas, less to cinema? Less to cinema, right? Now think about this. Why am I making arrows, right? Now this really helps you to internalize what I'm saying. When the direction of the arrows is same, when the direction of the two arrows is the same, this upwards, this upwards. In this case, this downwards, this downwards. So if one variable is decreasing, the other variable is also decreasing. And similarly, if one variable is increasing, the other one is also increasing. So when the two variables move in same direction, when two variables move in same direction, they have a positive sign. When two variables, right? We can also do calculation to prove this idea, but you can take my word for it because this is mathematically true. When two variables move in same direction, they have positive sign. Easy? Confusion, right? Same direction or direction. Direction is basically when one is increasing. What I mean by direction, one is increasing, the other one is increasing. If one is decreasing, the other one is decreasing. When two variables move in same direction, the overall formula would have positive sign. Easy. So just by this is for your own understanding, not to explain this to the examiner, right? Because obviously you would have studied this much maths. The overall formula will be positive. Easy. Okay. Now, how would you explain this thing? The way I explained you with examples. You can use same examples. You can come up with your own examples, whatever, right? So if fuel is getting expensive, people will use less private cars and instead they will start using public transport. On the other hand, if Netflix subscription is decreasing, right? So people will not go to cinemas or less people will go to cinemas. Easy. Confusion. Oh, okay. Wow. Wow. Interesting. Okay. After this, let's come to complementary goods. Now for complementary goods, what examples we were taking, right? So which have joint consumption, fuel and car, right? Fuel and car is a good example, Netflix and internet, right? Now think about this. If fuel is becoming expensive, as we were discussing, right? So the demand for cars would decrease. Yes or no, right? So think about this. I might have made up a plan, and this does happen in real life, right? I might have planned to update my car, right? To buy a new one, right? But if I'm upgrading my car and I know that the new car would consume more fuel, and nowadays the fuel is already very expensive, right? So I might give up on that idea. I repeat, right? So some people give up on that idea, right? Similarly, let's think of another example, right? So if I'm thinking of, let's say, another example could be, let's say, summers are already here, feels like at least, right? So if summers are already here and, okay, just a second. Just give me a second, students. I'll be. Okay, now students, yeah, so I was saying that summers are already here, right? And I would know that, consumption of electricity would be higher because fan could be constantly on and AC would be on, right? Then I might not want to buy another electronic appliance given the fact that, electricity is more expensive. Are you getting me? So if electricity is getting expensive, simply put, I might postpone my plan of buying another electric appliance, because I don't want my electricity bill to be too high, right? So electricity goes up, the demand for electronic appliances go down. So in complementary things, if one product is becoming expensive, the demand for the other thing decreases. Are you getting me or not? So if one thing is becoming expensive, the demand for the other thing goes down. Easy? Is it making sense? Right? So these are some examples you can think of, right? Okay. Okay. Now, since the two variables are moving in opposite directions, since the two variables are moving in opposite direction, what it means? It means that the overall sign by this, by this statement, by this rule, if the two variables were moving in same direction, the formula was overall positive. Now, since the two variables are moving in opposite direction, one increases, the other one decreases, and vice versa. So the formula would have negative sign. The overall value for complementary goods is negative, right? And the sign of cross elasticity of demand for substitute goods is positive. This will always be true, right? It's not with the examples that I've discussed. This will be always true, no matter what examples you take, right? Easy. Okay. Now, after you've explained this, I forgot, right? Okay. Now comes in that's the main part. We have explained that substitute goods with examples, they have a positive sign, complementary goods with examples, they have a negative sign. Now is the interesting part. And those that have no relationship, and those goods that have no relationship. Now, who can tell me? Now, I'll wait for your response before I explain it. How do we know if we are calculating cross elasticity of demand that the two variables have no relationship? Now, let me give you an example. Right. So let's say, let's stick to this example, Netflix and price of coffee or coffee, right? So do you expect coffee could still be some sort of complementary, right? Netflix and fuel, right? So if two things have absolutely no relationship, right? How do we show that through cross elasticity of demand? Right, exactly, right? That's correct, right? Okay, now students, think about this. If two products have absolutely no relationship, right? Now, fuel is not needed for Netflix. You don't watch Netflix when you're driving, right? So there's absolutely no connection, right? Now, the idea is, and obviously you can make up some of your own examples. So the idea is that, now listen to me carefully. If the price of fuel is changing nowadays, let's take a real life example. So if the price of fuel is increasing nowadays, would you expect anything to happen to Netflix, right? I mean, not really, right? Because there's no such, as such, what do we call that? Reason for us to believe that change in fuel price would cause change in the demand for Netflix. Yeah, the demand for Netflix could change due to reasons like, there's lockdown, people are not going out, or people are getting more introverts and they like to sit at home and watch movies all by themselves, or movie tickets are getting expensive. So these factors will affect the demand for Netflix. But a thing like, fuel prices going up, so there won't be much effect. And therefore, the overall value of cross elasticity of demand, that's the acronym that we use for cross elasticity demand, the overall value of cross elasticity of demand for unrelated goods. For what? For unrelated goods would be close to zero. Even if it's not completely zero, close to zero, right? How many of you got this part? Right, yeah, some real possibility, right? Okay, now one last thing. If there is a stronger relationship, now instead of explaining you like this, let me give you an example. Coffee and tea, right? So that's one pair of the good. And the second pair of good is Coke and Pepsi. I mean, this is a close competition, but still. Right. Out of these two, first of all, tell me, are both the pairs, so this is one pair, pair A, pair B. First of all, tell me, are both the good substitute, complementary, what? Right. So, okay, what I was saying would be that if there are two unrelated products, listen to this one more time, kids. If there are two unrelated products, then the value of cross elasticity of demand will be close to zero. I mean, it would be close to, what do I mean by close to zero? So it would be 0.13 with any sign, right? So 0.13, I mean, it's a very small value. So if you compare 0.13, it could be positive, could be negative. I'm not saying anything, right? But if you compare this value with something like 2.2 or 2.3, right, this is a bigger value. So close to zero would be like, anything less than 0.5. There's no rule around it, but anything less than 0.5 is a very weak value or very low value to establish any relationship. So we will say if the value is close towards one, either positive or negative, that doesn't make any difference. We say that there's no relationship or next to no relationship between the two goods. So if you calculate the cross elasticity of demand, given we don't have values for Netflix and fuel, you'll see that the value will be somewhere close to zero. All right, Mubin? Is this clear? Okay. Now, first thing, are both of these pair substitutes complementary what? Very nice. Great. Now I'm about to explain you another very important thing. Are both of these two products that I've written on the screen, are they complementary goods, substitutes, what? These are substitutes. Excellent, right? These are substitutes, right? Okay. Now, for which of the two pair? Now, let me give you some, right? Which of the two? So let's say there's 2.5. So there's 2.5, and then there is 1.5, right? So which value would you assume for which pair? Which value you would assume for which pair? That's just a point I'm trying to prove, but just make a guess. For which pair of the goods would you assume the value to be 2.5, and for which pair of the good would you assume the value to be 1.5? And the reason for that. 2.5 for B. 2.5 for B. Good, Mubin, why? Why? So Mubin is saying the bigger value will be for Coke and Pepsi. Why? Right? Because students, Coke and Pepsi, I think, right, they are much more closely related to they're much closer substitutes compared to coffee and tea, right? So in countries where people drink coffee, they always prefer coffee, right? Or most of the time. And so whichever of the two, now here's the last thing I'm about to explain you for today. The more stronger the substitutes or more stronger the complementary goods, the bigger the value. Just like there is no relationship, the value is close to zero. On the other hand, the stronger the bond, the stronger the substitute goods or stronger the complementary goods, the bigger the value. Easy? Any confusion so far? Anything that's not clear? You good? We good, students? Right? So let's stop it for today. Tomorrow we'll continue from here. I really appreciate when you bring your questions and you keep the class interactive. So we'll continue from here tomorrow. Have a good day and take care. Allah Hafiz. Allah Hafiz.